Welcome to Soul Nutrition, where we discuss the various ways of nourishing our souls. I'm your host, author, speaker, and coach, Reina Rose. Today's guest, I am so excited to introduce to you today, Paul Edwards. Paul is an international best-selling author, content ghostwriter, and host of the Influencer Networking Secrets podcast. A first-generation Spanish-speaking immigrant to the U.S. with African heritage and Middle East combat experience, Paul has lived in 5 different countries, speaks 2 languages, and holds 3 passports. Paul does 2 things well: words and people. When he isn't writing content for clients, you'll most likely find him building relationships and creating opportunities for his network. Paul, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show today.
Reina, so nice of you to have me. Thank you very much. And as you're fond of saying, I'm really just here to work on world peace.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just get right into it. Current events right now have been pretty tumultuous, and both of us have lived in several countries, speak several languages, very citizens of the world. How is your heart feeling right now, especially with African heritage? And just tell me more about that.
You know, it's so interesting you start off that way. So the thing that I have to that I've been challenged to begin to discuss is the fact of the familial line of ancestry on my mother's side of the family that reaches back to apartheid in South Africa. And I would not call my family on that side enforcers or political advocates of it. I would simply call them people who lived and raised families in it, experienced the transition out of it, all of the initial wonder and excitement at the notion that the South African government, the apartheid government that was in power until 1992, essentially voted themselves out of power.
Yeah.
In order that balance could be restored to that society. And, we now have the benefit of hindsight. And of course, if you actually bother to take a look at what has happened in South Africa ever since, it's pretty much we've exchanged one group of thugs for another. And as I look at what's erupting over the country, I'm reminded of the much more profound truth that this is not actually a racial problem, but a spiritual problem that manifests itself along racial lines. And that's what makes it so impossible for us to have the conversation, is we have rejected the spiritual.
Yeah.
And I know we're getting quite deep here in the very first moments of the conversation, but hey, we've got a little bit of time. As long as we are convinced that this world is all there is, and we are the top of the food chain arbiters of what stands and what falls, that we are not accountable, nor are we under the authority of a supreme judge, which, let's face it, our government and our school system and our culture and our various groups, all to more or less of a degree, pay lip service at best to the supreme judge. And he's already made clear that you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me, and therefore you don't get to participate in my kingdom.
Yeah.
And so what's left to happen but pretty much what we're looking at.
Right. And we were speaking before we hit record about, we pray your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And on earth means in our lives. And if we are not, and I wrote it down because it was so profound. I said we have to hit record because we're having such a great conversation before we even hit record. But you were speaking about having clarity on asking God, what should I be praying? What do I need to pray? What would you have me pray, God? And listening to that rather than saying, God, do this and God, do that. And hey, God, fix this. Because a lot of times we're praying for fix this, but that's not the root of the problem. That's like just chop the weed off at the top, little flowers, rather than uproot the weed of the spiritual depravity that, until we can love God, we have to love God to love every creature God has breathed breath into. Mm-hmm. And if our hearts are far from him, they're also going to be far from each other, regardless of what differences we want to blame it on.
Yes, and I liken it to trying to fix a broken down car by changing the tires.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good start. I mean, the car's not going to roll if the tires are all flat. Okay. But if the engine is completely kaput, right, and needs to be taken apart and cleaned and reassembled and outfitted with new parts and all that, but we just keep trying to change the tires. We keep thinking, well, if we just make a law, this will go away. Or if we just establish a new set of standards for the way the police are to act, this will go away. We can't ignore. I'm not saying that in this particular situation that what George Floyd did that elicited a police response was anything like deserving of what ended up happening to him. But he was in the middle of committing a crime when it happened.
Right.
And it was not the first crime he'd committed. And I know that's nobody cares about that, right? We're in the middle of a very emotional discussion. Mm-hmm. We cannot make lawless people suddenly lawful by making a law against lawlessness, right? Right. You have to have an internal collective desire on the part of everyone to be lawful. And for the same goes, by the way, for the officer. I mean, if you look at Derek Chauvin, I think his name is.
Yeah, it's his record.
Repeated offender of department standards, reprimanded. I believe it was the day after this incident occurred. I read somewhere in the news that his wife divorced him the same day. Oh, and I'm like, that's way too quick of a decision. No, this was building. This guy was a ticking time bomb. This guy he wasn't doing that by accident.
And I don't know if the department knew about the wife divorcing, but I saw someone say, there's some professions where you just can't have bad eggs. You can't afford to have bad days, right? And, had they known, I don't know if they did, about that, I would imagine that would be a day not to go to work.
Well, yeah.
Especially with that kind of record.
And so what I see in both of those cases, and in the cases of all of the people now who are ranting and raving on social media in one direction or another, is that we're seeing the manifestation of the spiritual bankruptcy of our age.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to have this discussion on social media. It's not a discussion you can have on social media. This is an emotional, volatile discussion that needs to be had face to face. And so I refuse to discuss it on social media.
Yeah.
It's not because I'm sorry, go ahead.
Keep going now.
It's not because I'm keeping silent because I don't have an opinion. I do. Mm-hmm. But I don't have either one of the dominant opinions, right?
Yeah.
My interests here are that in all areas where love was not properly observed, that we acknowledge that it wasn't, and we say, the more we fail to observe love as dictated to us in the Bible, mm-hmm. The more we're going to get of the same old. Doesn't matter how many nice little laws we make in DC or wherever we make them.
Right. It's a bottom line, whether we're talking about spiritual completely or even just this one issue, it all comes down to a heart change, to what the Greek would call metanoia, or repentance, which now comes along with a lot of guilt and shame, but it wasn't meant to. It just means make a 180-degree turn. And with the racial issues, with, some people being left in jobs maybe they shouldn't be, especially that hold people's lives in the balance, with just plain, is this loving or is this not? We need to, as a culture, as an entire planet, have a heart change, a heart repentance that is a 180-degree turn from what's been going on. And at least with people, the ones who are peaceful protesting, and unfortunately those are not the ones we see on the news, but there's been thousands of the peaceful protests with no problems at all. In those peaceful protests, with people just standing up and saying, we need to make a change, it does go so much farther beyond this issue. But my prayer is, God, teach me what to pray, and may this be the catalyst for change. If we're going to have all this unrest, would it lead to enough unrest for people to change? Sometimes people need that pain point in order to make a change in their lives. And prayerfully, with COVID-19 and all this unrest around racism, people can wake up, realize we need God, realize we need to take a pause and reset, do a complete Control-Alt-Delete on society.
It is unfortunately the way that that we get brought forward beyond biblical infancy. If you've read the passages where the discussion centers around you're still eating milk and you should be on solid food.
Yes.
Or the numerous passages dealing with maturity, spiritual maturity. The intent there is that you go on to become the kind of person for whom these kind of things, some of them are just out and out gone, never occur. And sin is not absent in your life, but it becomes much more the exception than the rule. Absolutely. And you become much more thoughtful and patient, so that you don't rush at things and rush to judgment and rush to misbehavior or whatever. That's the very direction we're being led. And if that's what it's going to take for a lot of people who, up until the last couple of months, we were just zooming as fast as we could. Yeah. And everybody was living high on the hog. If that's what's on order to disrupt that, to get our attention so that we actually focus on the most important thing. I don't know that we maybe should be praying the generic prayers. I'm not saying I want to pray, please let there be destruction and violence nonstop. I'm saying, please, Lord, do whatever you need to do, first of all, with me, and second of all, with everyone that I love and everybody that I care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit it on the head there, that it begins with, Lord, change me, because oftentimes we want to change everyone else. At the end of the day, we still have the problems.
Most certainly. Pride is atop the list of 7 deadly sins. It's not by accident. It's not because they just said, they didn't do it in alphabetical order, that's for sure. They did it because it's the number one.
Yeah. And it's really hard to see in yourself. You really have to have that mirror of wise counselors around you to recognize when you're falling into pridefulness, because the fine line between confidence and, it's actually not that fine of a line, I think, between confidence and pride. It's more maybe and you speak about confidence a lot in your book, so I'd love to hear your opinion on between confidence and pride. Is it where it comes from? Where confidence comes from a different place in the heart, where pride is coming, for self, and maybe confidence is coming for others?
It's a great question. I want to say, Reina, that I'm probably going to miss some categories in my answer here. So there's probably people listening going to say, why didn't he speak about it from this angle? And why didn't he talk about it from that angle? I'm sorry, I don't know. I only know what's coming to me, right? When I talk about confidence in the context of business networking, my favorite example actually is a very well-known political figure by the name of Ronald Reagan, who's no longer with us. And President Reagan was known, I mean, if all you got to do is watch old YouTube videos of it, he was known for having this relaxed, sunny, nonchalant, and also very witty and clever way of explaining his point of view and retaliating against his opponents with a smile, right? So that, you know, as just as an example, that there's a famous press conference where Sam Donaldson stands up, this reporter from ABC stands up and says, "Mr. President, in the continuing recession, you've blamed mistakes of the past and you've blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?" And he says, "Yes, because for many years I was once a Democrat." Right? He was just clever, but he was funny. And and the reason I say that, I'm not trying to, like, people writing to me, why are you so mad at the Democrats? I'm not demonizing anybody here. I'm using it as an example. He was that way because he had spent decades in radio and television and movies, preparing and rehearsing lines over and over, studying their delivery, standing in front of a mirror and delivering them, watching himself deliver them on camera, on tape, listening to how he delivered it. So that by the time he was doing that job, President of the United States, campaigning for it, holding the office, campaigning for re-election, it was just an ingrained habit.
Yeah.
Of how he carried himself and how he presented himself. And he would carry note cards and he would memorize and practice his jokes every spare minute he got, because he understood that the easiest way to try and build rapport with people, even if they didn't really agree with you all that much, was humor and he had a very avuncular way at his age, you know, like a kindly old uncle way of coming across to people. That's my idea of confidence. That's doing the homework, doing the research, doing the fundamentals produces confidence. Arrogance and egotism is thinking you know it all and you don't have to. Right.
It's the opposite of being prepared, really. It's I'm not prepared, so I'm going to overpride it and pretend that I am.
Staggeringly unprepared. And how do I know that? Because I've made the mistake so many times. Right. Of not doing the homework. And you know, I used to have school teachers, they would actually tell me, I had one of them, I had a Spanish teacher. I was really good with languages, right? I could pick up languages really well. And I never studied. And I knew the answers to a lot of the tests. I would always get at least a B or an A.
Yeah.
So I'd sit there in class and just goof off. And she'd drag me out in the hall one day and she's like, "You know, you have such a gift with the language. I'll give you that, but you're arrogant and cocky." And I'd never had anybody tell me that before. And I didn't know what she was talking about. But all you had to do was go to another one of my classes where I didn't have a natural aptitude, and proved her point exactly. And also in hindsight, you know, I can see, like, boy, if I had wanted to apply myself in that environment, the way I apply myself to my work and to what I do now, boy, I could have steered my life in a much different direction than I did as a young man.
I did the same thing. I came from, you know, a British education system in Borneo, and I did the opposite though. I didn't know all the answers. I was spelling, you know, color with a U when I first came back, and I was doing the math all wrong. And so had I had the knowledge I have now as a little kid, I would have told those teachers, "You need to learn English, not me. You know, you're speaking American by spelling color without a U." And the ways I was doing my math wasn't right. And just constantly I was doing what I had once been taught, but is no longer correct.
Yes.
And I honestly nearly failed out of elementary school. But once I caught on, I was just such a better problem solver. I could flexibly go from one system to another and see the problems because of the challenge. But it first just like knocked me completely off of how to learn anything. And I totally gave up on school. And so learning how to be prepared. I would like be in my history teacher's class at lunch every single day, just doing the homework, making sure I had everything done, knowing the right answers. That came from feeling really stupid because I'm switching school systems, to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to be extra prepared. Because in the other school system, I could just, get by without too much preparation. But it's good to be thrown into these challenges, kind of like we are in this current environment that forces us to do something different, forces us to come up with new solutions to our problems.
Which, you didn't ask me this, but I'll just volunteer, is the origin of my book.
Yes, and that's an entrepreneur's job, right? Is to solve problems.
Yes, but I think there's a temptation to think solve problems means figure out how to make XYZ widget work, and
right.
that can be the problem. But I think quite a bit more often the problem is you.
Right.
You got to figure out how to make I've had this discussion with so many people recently. It's starting to become a thread that shows up everywhere. It's entrepreneurship is about becoming an entirely different version of yourself.
Yeah.
It is a extremely spiritual exercise.
Absolutely. And you talk about the 5 qualities of a generous entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that to learn to be generous is a lifelong lesson that God teaches us. Could you tell us a little bit more about those 5 qualities of the, what is it? The radically generous entrepreneur? Yeah, radically generous. I love that.
Well, I was struggling in the insurance business. If you've seen the movie Groundhog Day, it's an over-the-top caricature, but it's actually not far from the truth. If you're an insurance salesman, you're selling a product people don't understand, don't really want to know about. In fact, if they've had negative experiences, they hate it. They've heard the stories. There's plenty of, and the more you, in a way, it's almost like the more you discover about it, the more confused you get.
Oh.
There really is no wrapping your head around it. Even professionals I know inside insurance companies who are underwriters and risk managers and attorneys and all that, they say there's no end to it. So I was in this position where my first job was just dialing for dollars and setting appointments. But the second job I took, my branch manager, gentleman by the name of Abron Harris, told me, I don't want to see you in this office most of the time. He said, if you're here, it's because you're closing business, taking money, signing forms. You should be out of here 85% of the time. That was his philosophy. And I didn't understand at the time what a gift he'd given me by telling me that, because I was totally used to being confined to the office. But off I went. I knew nothing about networking. I knew nothing about even where to go. I just started Googling places, And I started going to these places, and at first I was just kind of quiet, observing, watching. My military experience kicked in, and I'm like, don't just rush in and all that. But after a while, you get talking to people. And I was very much in the military mindset of go out and kill something, right? So figuratively speaking, not literally, but
right.
I would go and I would try and start the conversation about insurance. And I got so little reciprocity from it, and so much I know, just back away, or never speak to me again in some cases. I got so much of that, and I was like, I'm not going to sell anything at all doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to sell. I got to figure out how to sell something,
Yeah. Because nobody wants to be sold, but everyone wants to buy, right?
Well, see, the thing is, they do want to buy, but in this context, what is it they're buying? That's the question.
Right. Mm-hmm.
they don't give a rip about the insurance policy, as long as it's enough to cover them when something happens, right? In other words, that we have in on auto insurance, you have what you call state minimums, right? And nobody wants to buy that coverage unless that's all you can afford.
Yeah.
So I was like, so the question to me became, well, what are they buying? And the very first time that this occurred to me was they had a thing in 2013, maybe 14, where a law had passed in Congress that was going to defund the federal coverage of flood zone insurance in noted, Class A flood zones where it's guaranteed your home's going to get flooded every year.
Right.
Well, we have a couple of those near where I live, and so I thought it would be a good idea just to bring it up to the local realtors association where I had been networking. And I did that, and that same day I had 5 or 6 people come up to me afterwards and start, saying, that was really helpful, thank you. And I got, those are kind of those open invitations. Hey, I'd like to get to know you better. Right.
Yeah.
And I quickly realized something from reading Dale Carnegie years ago is that I gave them information that's useful to them, not me.
Yes.
But I gave it as an expert, because it's about insurance and I'm an insurance agent. I gave them information useful to them about something that I understand.
Yeah.
So I said to myself, okay, well, I can't go to every context and do that, but I can take the principle. And this is a bit of a long-winded way of answering your question. I'm aware of that. I said, I can take the principle and I can start talking to a lot more audiences about some very conventional topics that no matter what group I'm in front of, if it's entrepreneurs anyway, if it's business people, salespeople, marketers, they're all going to want to know it.
Yeah.
And probably about a year later or so, a mentor of mine was sitting there watching me. He thought I was a really good networker, told me so many times. And then he said to me one day, he said, why don't you teach a seminar on networking itself? And the thought had never occurred to me, but when I sat down to think about it, I said, I probably could do that. I probably could put together a simple, little PowerPoint, couple bullets, and just talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And so some of the stuff that you read in the book today, in fact, that is still making it into the 3rd version of my book, I'm still using. And I still use the same terms that I used in that original presentation I gave.
Yeah.
And so that's where these 5 qualities came from, as I realized over and over again throughout the entire time from then on as an insurance agent and through to today as a ghostwriter, I use some or all of those principles with all of the business relationships I cultivate.
Absolutely. And I know you talk about like the 5 tips for networking with dream connections. Can you explain what that is for our audience?
Well, what happens if you do this enough, right? It's like anything else. If you go and practice a sport like tennis long enough, the right way, eventually you can't play in the baby leagues anymore, right? And what I found was I was networking at a very basic level, and that started to get stale.
Yeah.
But what also happened was I had solidified some relationships there, and had joined some nonprofit boards where all of a sudden I had to find some higher stakes opportunities. And I started getting invited to things that none of my competitors even knew about, never mind got invited to.
Amazing.
And I was like, what's going on here? And so I realized that if you do the business of personal relationships faithfully, right? He who is faithful in small things can also be trusted with big things. If you do the business of networking through relationships faithfully for the average person you meet long enough, pretty soon you'll be doing it in front of the not so average person you meet.
Yeah.
And but then of course the question is, well, what are you going to do when you're in front of that person? And I take you in a sort of a circular path to say, if you do this, if you practice these 4 things on this person, these people that you see every day, when you get in front of that whale who has the power to elevate you in business, you'll get a chance. You'll know what to do. You won't need to. So to answer the question to people who are listening, so what are these tips? Okay,
Yeah.
the first one is focus on the farm team.
Right? But make sure you read the book too, because there's so much in here, and I'm just in the beginning, and I've already been highlighting and taking notes, and there's so much more than these 5 tips or the other. I really encourage you, go out and buy this book. It's so good. It's the Influencer Networking Secrets book as well, right?
Yes, it's not available just yet, but if you go to my website, we'll give the URL in your show notes and all that, I'm sure. But you can go there and get on the list. We're going to be doing some advanced copies in September, so that's why I'm starting to get out there and talk about it now.
Excellent.
So you asked what the tips were. So I've put focus on the farm team as number 1, and focus on the farm team is just a cute way of saying do this for everybody, right? Do this for people you meet at the local chamber luncheon. Do this for people you meet through the Rotary Club. Do this for people in your neighborhood. Then I say, okay, now here's the how, right? And you start with, I call it being, there's a couple ways I've phrased this. My latest favorite way of saying it is become a scout, become a publicist, and become a counselor. And so a scout is, you'll read the principle there, keep your ear to the ground. And you're basically starting to keep your ears up, your radar up for opportunities, people, connections, clients, prospects and all that for other people instead of yourself.
Yeah, that's, that has been such a change maker in my own life. I completely agree with you on that one.
So, I'm trying to think of a real time example here, but you can do this with client opportunities. You can also do it with events. You can do it with, as you and I have been doing with opportunities to appear on shows, right? It's another version of chapter 3, which is pro bono publicity, right? You're basically making opportunities for other people in business to get more opportunities, whatever they may be. So that's the scout, and that's the keep your ear to the ground. The next one is be an angler. And I recently wrote a blog about this.
And will that be on that same link if we want to go check out that blog?
I will have the blog on my website. So yeah, there's a section there. You'll be able to see it. I borrowed this term from fly fishing, which I've actually never done. But what I understand about fly fishing is a good fly fisherman casts the rod with the bait on it, and he's able to make it look like the bait, which is usually an insect, is flying across the surface of the water, and the fish look up and they see it and they say, oh, lunch, right? Yeah. And that's quite a skill. Well, the analogy that I'm using there is you need to go to a networking function, but you can't go there for the same reasons that everybody else is there, right? So you go there to do business, but you can go there for business reasons. And that makes all the difference, because that takes the pressure off of selling, right? You don't have to say buy insurance or buy whatever I'm selling. But you can go there for business reasons, right? Meet people, learn things, find out about opportunities, right? See what this is all about. I'm curious, I'm new, any number of those things.
And again, like you mentioned in the scouting for other people's opportunities, who can I be of service to here? Who can I connect here? And ultimately that service leads to fruitful business in your own life too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I like to say I do stuff for free and I send God the bill.
I love that. And you are a super connector. I'm thankful already to be in your network. And so someone who can become like you have made yourself, that people recognize you as someone who's a super connector. I want to be part of his network. Then people want to do business with you because they just want to be part of what you're all about, what you're doing. And we discussed a little bit before the show. I was talking about how I sometimes relate the way that we can do Christianity to your early attempts at insurance sales, you know, where it was all about trying to tell people about what you're doing and what you are trying to sell them. And we can get caught up in that in our Christian walk too, where we're trying to kind of sell Jesus and sell some heavenly life insurance, you know, and instead of people wanting to get caught up in this beautiful, you know, kingdom living that we are experiencing.
Yeah.
And that's what I see in you. Like, you have this amazing energy and you are such a giver, and people just want to be part of what you're doing, whatever that might be.
I'm grateful. I'm honored. I only wish it had been that way much longer in my life than it was. And if I get any credit at all, it's only for having chosen to listen a little bit more than I previously did. And you'd be amazed what it took to get me to do that. But there it is.
and you know, that's encouragement that we can choose to listen at any age. We can choose to listen now, and God will restore to us the years the locusts had eaten, even if we were our own locusts.
Oh, you have no idea.
Oh, I do.
But you probably do.
I sure do. I've been an entrepreneur since 19, so I definitely have had to learn this lesson time and time again. Sometimes I pray, God, please don't make me walk around the mountain for 40 years and help me just enter right into that promised land. And like you said, it's that listening, just like we talked about in the beginning of the show. God, what would you have me pray? What would you have me talk about today? What would you have me? And that's what we do before every show is, you know, Holy Spirit, lead this conversation. If we would only enter business this way. And I know, for, like, at least for my personal clients, I always take at least a half hour and just praying for them that God would speak through me, not me leading them, you know? And so, yeah, that encouragement that you were saying, just to listen and listen now. Don't wait another 10 years, another 20 years, whatever it might be for people. And for us.
Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. No.
Amen. And so how many did we get so far? We had to be a scout, that
was a Selah moment there. We were just
I know, I was like marinating, and then I'm like,
we needed to ring a bell or something so everybody. So done for you publicity is the next one. So we've covered being an angler, you know, and that's, again, that just goes back to, you're there, but you're not there for the reason that anybody else is there.
Yeah. And that's
even
that desperation that you feel at networking events, you know, that I need to sell you something, you have to do business. It's just, oh, you know, I'm here. If I can help you, great.
I'm here to serve. Yeah.
I'm here to serve. Yeah. And isn't that what Jesus calls us to do? That's that upside down kingdom world that doesn't make sense until it does.
Correct. Yeah.
So sorry, be an angler, and then the pro bono publicity is for
done for you publicity. I make a subtle distinction there. There's some overlap with the pro bono publicity concept, but basically, I have a friend, John Corcoran, who used to write speeches for President Clinton, and he's a big networker too. And a while back, he posted this, and I loved what he posted because I suddenly realized, never having read it, that it was exactly what I did for some of the most powerful relationships I've built. So, you know, he talks about just some very practical things, and it boils down to becoming a good customer of the person you want to have a relationship with. So buy their stuff, right? Buy their courses, read their books, promote it on social media, go to their conferences and events, ask for an interview. You know, send them a sincere handwritten note, look for friends you have in common with them, and build toward that relationship. And and you know, I've got very practical examples, but just as a recent one, you know, I had John Eldridge on the podcast a few months back, and he's got this new book out, and I detail it in the book. I say, look, I'm not saying that I suddenly presented John with an offer he couldn't refuse. He was in the market to be on podcasts anyway. You know, let's be honest about that. However, he gets a proposal to appear on a podcast. Number one, this guy is a Ransomed Heart Boot Camp alumnus who's been supporting the organization for years, who has interviewed two of his closest guys that work there at Ransomed Heart and several other recognizable names in the kingdom. He's read every book you've ever written. He can speak fluent Ransomed Heartese, right? And he's a personal success story, a personal living, breathing testimonial to everything that you've tried to. I mean, does that sound like would you look at an opportunity like that, Reina, if it was all geared to what would you do and say, no, I don't really want to be on a podcast like that?
Right. No, of course you would want to be on that.
Yeah, you build a case, right? Mm-hmm. And very often the way this happens is by building relationships with the person closest to that person, because you can't go directly to someone who's got, you know, all these accolades and pedigrees and all these people wanting their attention. No, you got to come in through the back door.
Right. And they're going to have gatekeepers to get to that front door anyway.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So done for you publicity. And then, of course, the other thing is, if none of those other things work, if I suddenly found myself in a situation where I had 10 minutes to have a conversation with a very influential person, right? We're sharing a taxi cab or something, or an Uber. There's always 3 questions that I found. I stole these from Vince Del Monte, who also stole them from somebody else. So I don't know.
Them from you.
You may steal them from me. I give you full permission. In networking, people always say, hey, how's it going? And you're like, you don't care. You know, if you do it enough times, you start to realize who's asking that question just because that's what everybody does and who actually means it, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy who just says, hey, how's it going? And then moves on.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So what you talk about, right? Generally.
But I don't want to be rude either and ignore people and pretend like they don't exist. So I'm not gonna. I'm gonna smile. You know, if someone walks up, I'll do the usual pleasantries. But I have these 3 questions, and usually the first one is the one that gets out of my mouth the earliest, and that says, "What's going well for you lately?"
I like that.
You're starting them off to get them thinking. Okay, most recent thing that made me smile, right?
Yeah.
Our mutual friend Adam Connors, he has his own version of this. He says, "What is the thing you've laughed at the hardest recently?" Brilliant question. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. He asked it of me, and and I had to think about it for a second. But what I did, I started belly laughing on the podcast. So
you're like, you made me laugh the hardest lately.
Yeah. So brilliant question. So what's going well for you lately? Second one is, what's not going so well for you lately? Now have something to write with if you can't remember this, because this is gold, right? People are going to tell you, oh God, I get employee problems. I'm pulling my hair out trying to deal with this issue. I can't get enough customers in the door, you know, to get all kinds of stuff. Or they'll tell you personal stuff, right? Doesn't matter. Listen and make mental notes of it. And most of the time, the bigger your mental Rolodex gets of people you know, the sooner you can offer them an answer to that problem or something to help relieve that pain.
Right.
You can say, I just watch people's shoulders kind of lighten up a little bit. I say, I may know someone who can help you with that. And they know that I mean it, right? They know I'm not just blowing smoke. They know, no, this I know this guy. I know how many people he knows. He probably does know someone who could help me.
And you really do. You wouldn't say it if you didn't.
It's the very words I live by, is who I know and who knows me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the last one, this one, if you get past those other two, and then you can always add in, well, what are you looking forward to lately? Because people love to talk about, well, I got vacations or trips coming up, or, I've got this business deal I'm working on and it's looking really good, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's just a way of getting them back on the positive. But it's also, and this is also these three questions I say are an introvert's best friend for networking, because you don't really have to say much beyond the three questions. If you get somebody talking, they'll talk for quite a while.
Yeah. And I mean, even I consider myself a very social introvert in the definition of, I want to have deep conversations with a few people. I have actually, especially as I'm sure you traveled around the world, you have many of those few people in different places. But I feel like as an introvert, we loathe the small talk, right? We just want to really know who somebody is. And then, if I can really know 100 people truly, then I'll know 100 people. But I want to really know who you are, what is going on in the depths of your heart, not just how you doing, how's the weather where you live,
Yeah. And that all takes time. And it can't be done in just one conversation either.
Yeah, but those three questions help you deep dive pretty quick into, what makes you smile, what's truly on your heart, and what do you look forward to? I mean, you're coming in past, present, future. We're really bringing that almost like that God time into things, because it's all past, present, future in one conversation.
Exactly. And that's, and people, you see, we have the present moment, but the past is always with us, and the future is, God willing, it's coming. Here's Siri trying to interrupt our call. So you have those categories, and you need to be mindful of them. But yes, that's an excellent point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, it gives you a very godly way of looking at the whole person. And sadly, the culture has encouraged us for decades now to simplify the answer to that question into one word if we can. Oh, I'm fine. Sorry, that's not good enough. I don't buy it for one thing, and I'm sick and tired of saying it for another.
Oh yeah. I actually, to be honest with you, even when I was a teenager in high school, and I remember when we learned our memory verse of James 1:2-3 about developing perseverance, through trials of many kinds. And so when I was having a pretty rough day and my friends would ask me how I'm doing, I'd say, I'm developing perseverance. And that was just my keyword for saying it's a bad day. Like things are not, I'm having trials of many kinds. And, at 17, those trials of many kinds could be, your skirt didn't fit today to, something
else. It is what it is. It's, I remember what bothered me when I was that age, and it doesn't bother me now. But
that's right.
Don't begrudge the people that it does. That's just their level of maturity. And now, of course, if they're still worried about that at 47, the way they were at 17, there may be some maturity issues we need to work on there. Yes.
And I think as a society, as we talked about in the beginning of the show, we do have maturity issues as an entire culture of the world. I mean, both of you and I, having traveled most of the entire world, I'd say that our whole world, including myself, and I'm sure you at times, we have maturity issues, and we do need to go from that milk to the meat, both spiritually, and as we do it spiritually, it will manifest in all other areas. I wanted to bring up one part of your book. I don't want to miss this, because like I said, I'm only in the beginning, and I'm already highlighting and taking notes and writing things down. And so I encourage everybody, make sure we can get that website on the screen here. Go check it out, sign up for the mailing list so that you can get the first copies that come out of this book. I feel so privileged to be able to have it already. And so you were mentioning about those radically generous entrepreneurs. And this part just really touched my heart. It said, radically generous entrepreneurs execute on a diligent, thorough schedule. They're thoughtful before, during, and after the working day. They aren't rushing to try to capture as much of the market as they can. They see work as an important component of life, but not the be-all and end-all. They reject the rampant workaholism of the Western entrepreneur class, and they break with our deep-seated cultural agreements that success is entirely up to us, and that we're therefore weak or defective because it isn't happening right away. Wow. So powerful to anyone who has ever run a business or even tried to run a business or tried to sell anything, just tried to be successful about anything. And I just love that part about, that we think it's entirely up to us. And again, that comes back to what we were talking about earlier. God, what would you have me pray? Because it's not up to us.
And what is, I know you're supposed to be asking the questions here, but what is, when you read that, what do you think back to in your own experience that maybe helps you see it a little bit clearer, or helps you understand, I put too much on my shoulders at one point?
Oh, I mean, I have a constant tendency to do so. Again, I started my first business when I was 19, and I'm very, ambitious, and I'm going to do it all. And I had wonderful, those spiritual teachers from that age, that when I would, business would be not as, my business was in fitness. And so it was pretty cyclical for the seasons. And I would be all upset, business is slow. What should I do? And my mentors would say, I think you should enjoy the slow season. The busy season will come again. And I think you should just be and enjoy this time with God, and not try to get people to come in, during Christmas time to be a fitness client of yours, like times when it's just not going to be productive anyway. That's not a good use of your time. Why don't you enjoy some rest? And other times where, I've had opportunities given to me that were said, I'd have to have 10 years of experience, so many thousands of dollars, which I had neither at the time. And I rested into being in the right place at the right times and doing the right things and fully showing up to what I was doing. But nothing I did could have gotten me 10 years of experience and the thousands of dollars I didn't have. Like, God opened the way for that. And so this combination of, like, I wasn't trying to squeeze every bit out of my own ability.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, when I read that, it was like, so much of our culture says hustle, 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 hustle at all costs. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to be diligent, do the work, form the relationships, and then, like, breathe, allow space for God to move.
Because what is not within your control cannot be changed into being within your control.
Absolutely.
And I remember that, see, the insurance industry is terrible for this. They say you got to sell this amount of life insurance policies or we're not going to pay you anything, right? And they pulled it on me so many times. And a mentor of mine one day said to me, I've stopped writing the goals of number of policies I want to sell. And I said, why? And he said, because it's not in my control. He said, I could do the absolute best job of being a persuasive and thorough and sincere and honest salesperson as I want to. At the end of the day, I cannot make another person say, I will spend my money with this person. I can give them every reason to, and I can leave them with no reasons not to, but they still reserve the right to say no. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to set a goal, I'm going to set a goal where the only person who is the determining factor on whether or not that actually happens is me.
Oh, I love that.
And so, I knew by that time, I said, I think I could run with that, because I knew, okay, I know if I go to networking groups consistently, I'll get business. I know if I go do trade shows consistently, I'll get business. I know if I go and do public speaking, I'll get business. I know if I go and serve on nonprofit boards, I'll get business. So I started setting goals saying, I'm going to go to this many networking events, and I'm going to speak at this, at this function, and I'm going to participate in that trade show, and I'm going to send X amount of handwritten notes every week. And I never really had to worry about it after that. No one ever grilled me about, your numbers are terrible. My numbers were they were never super high, but they were decent. They were always enough that made it worth keeping me on, kept me earning an income and all that. And, I really wanted to, since I felt like I was stuck quote unquote, in the insurance business, that I really really wanted to be excellent and become a top seller there. But it didn't happen because it was sort of a side trek to teach me a skill that I would not have picked up otherwise.
I love how God does that.
Well, because would we choose it? Right.
Right. Exactly.
Of course not, And so, so I never got to the kind of numbers I wanted to, but I definitely built this personal brand that, I would walk into rooms and people would come running up to me and I had no idea who they were. And they'd say, I love your Facebook videos. Those are just the coolest thing in the world. And I do these little like selfie videos, just, babbling about something, but, and I'm like, that's great. And you are, and that was what I took with me when I left the insurance business and I started writing books and studying influence and all that. As I said, I built all this influence and I had all this clout and I could make things move and happen for people and connect people. And it's like, there's got to be something to this.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there was.
Right. And now you have polished that skill to where now that you have those dream network clients, you are natural with anyone because everyone's, you're there to serve, you're there to learn, and people bring you into their circles for that reason.
Yes. And to your emphasis there on what I wrote, I'm also not rushed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm here to serve. And if it makes sense, if it's a good fit, great. Would love to have you as a client.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make sense, we can still be friends. Doesn't have to work out. I'm not like,
And sometimes it's not that person that it's meant to work out with anyway. It's someone that person introduces you to or something. I give that example with a job, that job that I didn't have the 10 years of experience for and all that. I had actually moved to that area to start an aviation business with a former colleague of mine. And I thought, we're going to do this business. This is how it's going to go. And God was just like, yeah, I couldn't get you out to Houston if I didn't, lure you in with that business, but that's not what I have for you.
Yeah. He's clever.
He is. And so, yeah. And so I love that part of the book. I love the idea of not being rushed. I think so often we have those goals that we don't even have control over anyway. I love the idea of making goals that you have complete control over, not being rushed. What advice would you give to someone? I mean, for me, I'm always telling people that are like clients with me to, especially if they're not doing what they want to do yet, to be able to save. I saved several years of income so I could kind of not be in that desperate position of, I need to make this happen right now. What about someone who hasn't maybe saved that or done that? How do you encourage them to calm down and not be in such a rush, even though it seems like they need whatever it is right now?
Well, there was some good advice given to me by a mentor of mine when I started to contemplate leaving the insurance business. And I said to him at the time, I don't really know that I can even make a living off of my talent. No one's ever volunteered to pay me for it. They don't have jobs around here for it. I could maybe get something in Seattle or Portland, which are the two nearest major markets, but that implies moving because I live just far enough from either one of them that it means a ferocious commuting lifestyle that's going to basically take out my family.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this guy. He's good, probably 30 years older than me. And he's one of these old men that has these eyes, right? And you read so much in them. And he just looked at me and he said, yeah, you're right. You don't have the prospects. And I said, what do I do? And he said, you prepare. He said, you show up at your job because you got to fund your lifestyle, right? You've got to pay for, feed your family and all that. And he said, then when you have 30 minutes here, 60 minutes there, stay up a little late, get up a little early, prepare, practice, write.
It's like Reagan.
Preparation, yeah. He didn't need to tell me to build connections because he knew I already built them.
Right.
But there's the side, of course, that you can be great at building connections, still not have a marketable offer for people. And I had that up until the beginning of this year, as a matter of fact, all the way through the end of 2019. I was trying to get people to buy a product I didn't know what it was.
Which is easy to do when you first get started in any business.
Well, that's the thing is, you need to be very clear when you walk into a room, how do you serve humanity? Rabbi Lappin, who you're going to meet, that's his way of asking the question. And it's a very different way of saying, what do you do? Right.
I love that. I feel like I want to ask that now instead of what do you do? How do you serve humanity?
Well, so do I. It's a habit I have to get into. And I so much of my networking now is through podcasting. So I don't usually find myself having to ask the question because most people come on the show and I already know. Right.
Right. You've done your research. And so I know I like to know the answers to the questions before I ask as well.
Yeah.
Just before we leave, we kind of did hit on that, if you're getting those no's, or you persevering and how to get to that yes. I think you kind of answered it in that question. But I wanted to talk to you. You hit a little bit on family. And especially right now, while people are starting to work from home and the borders between home and work are starting to be blurred, how does one make sure that they have as perfect as possible of a balance between, giving your work life and how you're funding your family as much energy as you can, as well as really being present and home and disconnecting per se from that work life to be fully present with your family?
That's a good question. And I would only answer it first by saying that I'm closer to understanding it than I used to be, but quite a ways away from where I think I'd like to be. And probably the number one thing, again, goes back to having that monastic heart that I describe in chapter 2. And we're just going to apply the principle here is benevolent detachment from your work. Right? When you're working, you're working. And when you're not, you trust God that, he's going to take care of you. I always ask people that question when they come to me with the anxiety. I say, well, does your father care about you or does he not?
Yeah.
It's a simple answer, right? It may not necessarily look like it right in the moment, but that answer hasn't changed. Does God, and I can ask myself that question. I've trained myself to ask that question. Can I trust the Father to get up from my computer, walk away, and go walk around the neighborhood with my wife?
Yeah.
Or go take my son, he's learning to rollerblade, and just walk around and as he learns to rollerblade. And of course, the answer to that question is yes. If you know the answer to that question, then you know that if you've put in, a good solid week's worth of work, and it's not quite where you want it to be, there's stuff left undone, et cetera, you know what? All else being equal, it's still going to be there on Monday.
Yeah.
And it's still going to be there as long as the company has the money to pay you, or you, if you're a business owner, then as long as you're earning an income and all that, it's not going away.
And if you're exhausted and trying to make it perfect, you may be making it less and less perfect.
Yes.
And more, trying to make it perfect. I think the expression is perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yes. And more is not necessarily better.
That's right. I used to work with someone that like, God love them, they were always trying to make things perfect, but sometimes they'd stay up all night long and then actually just make this ball of twine that took unraveling for the next week. And
Yes.
so can we trust God? And also, why do I want to trust myself in this part of this fatigue that I'm putting myself into? God is much more trustworthy than I am, and he can work miracles. Well, I'm not. Of course, we put in the work. I think some people use it as an excuse to not do any work. But when we're doing the part we can trust God to do the rest. So what was the expression you gave us about making the deposits?
Sorry, which one? Making the...
I think you said something about like you do something and then God does the rest.
Oh yeah, I give generously up front and I send God the bill.
The bill, yes, I send God the bill. So I love that, and that I really just thank you for all your wisdom, your insight, and just the person you are, Paul. I've been really inspired just in the short time I've known you with the way that you are completely embody that radically generous entrepreneur. And again, I encourage anybody out there listening, make sure to go to the website. We'll have it up on the screen, and get on the list to get the first copies available of this book. You want to learn how to become radically generous, whether that is in your business, working for somebody, or in your faith, that we are radically generous and being the type of faith that people are attracted to and want to know about this amazing gift in Christ that we have, that is life, or in your business. It's going to benefit you regardless what situation you're in. You're really going to love this book. And so, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our time together.
Thanks so much, Reina. It was great to be here.
Wonderful. And for those of you listening, thank you again for tuning in. And until I see you next time, may the Lord bless and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you, and nourish your soul.